Dr. Samantha Nutt, welcome to Studio 9, our incredibly creative podcast name.
Thank you. It's a beautiful spot.
It is, isn't it? It's kind of like, you can't see it if you're watching us, but it's like
right
being
up
in
there
a,
with the toilet next
yes,
door.
it's like being in an old bathroom. It really is. It's like a surgical unit almost
know.
too. It's like everything is very sterile. You have tile and you have stainless steel and a safe. I don't know what's in the safe.
Just in case we want to lock ourselves in
Yeah,
there.
exactly.
And do a little magic show.
Yeah, it's like something that, you have to, that's serious safe. Anyway, so thank you for hanging out with me. And I'm just so thankful that you could take the time to be here and work with the kids today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. What a great group.
Yeah, and
so much energy. It's amazing.
Yeah, and if you are just listening to this and you don't know what we're talking about, Sam just spoke to about 1,700 youth at the Global Student Leadership Summit from all over the world. So it was just an amazing morning. Anyway, Sam, so take us back a little bit to something that I love that you talk about a lot. You talk about that when you were in school, your report card labeled you.
Over and over again.
Yes. So what
None
were
of
some,
them very flattering.
Yeah. So what were some of the labels that you got?
Well, I mean, I went through some of these today, but chatty was a common one, inattentive, disruptive, and one of the ones I spoke about today, which still makes me laugh, is that my physics teacher wrote that I was totally incapable of understanding physics. Which was funny because this was on top of, at the parent-teacher meeting, she had this whole sort of metaphor where she talked about how she's nearsighted, and so because she's nearsighted, she doesn't play baseball. And then she paused, and then she looked at my mother and she said, "Sam can't do physics."
Oh my gosh.
But the best part of this story is I dropped physics, and then I took it again. It's like in second year university. Right. And it ended up, not to sort of brag about it, but I'm pretty proud of this accomplishment. After being told I couldn't do it, I got over 90 in second year university physics, and I took a photocopy of it and sent it to her at the school. And all this to say is that, teachers are wonderful and they're great, and the best ones will encourage you and mentor you and see the potential that you have. But you will, in your lifetime, have people who tell you what they think you're capable of. And the lesson for me is that most of the time they're wrong.
Right.
And so, you don't know at 13, 14, 15 years of age what someone will ultimately become. Circumstances change, people change, and in many cases, it's about investing in those leadership opportunities.
Right. And I think, do you think like labels, like you're being labeled, and that can change a kid's life, those labels that they get?
Oh, it can. I mean, I was convinced I couldn't do physics. And so even when I had to, because I was interested in applying to medical school, I had to take second year university physics. I was physically ill when I would sit in that class because I was convinced that there was a part of my brain that was fundamentally missing.
You've been told you can't do this.
And there is a part of my brain that's fundamentally missing. It's the part that involves singing in key.
Me too.
But it's not the physics part.
Okay, yeah. And so that's interesting because I think when young people in general, when they get told they can or can't do something, they'll live to that limit, right?
That's right.
Yeah. They won't see beyond that.
Yeah, and you shouldn't let somebody else define your potential.
No.
Right? It's. I mean, sometimes we need a reality check. You can't let your ego run away with you and think that you're amazing at absolutely everything and that kind of thing. But the reality is that sometimes what you need to do is you need to invest differently, or you need to find different people who can teach in a way that works for you. And I've learned that in my lifetime anyway.
How often do you work with young people like this today? Like, is that something you do a lot of, working with young people, or is it more adult groups? Do you speak to more corporate groups or more like organizations? Like what is that? What is the percentage of what you do?
Well, I'm not precious that way. I'll speak to anyone who'll listen.
Perfect. Right.
On an elevator, in the subway, on a streetcar,
right.
In an airplane, because when you run an organization, when you're running War Child, you're constantly having to introduce people to that organization and talk about what you do and why, and hopefully people should support your efforts. So for me, I'm certainly not precious that way at all. I love speaking to young people in particular, and high school students are great because they just have such infectious energy and idealism, and they're prepared to challenge. They're prepared to, they're not afraid of losing things, and so they're prepared to put their opinions out there and confront those in power, and they're not interested in pandering or placating to those who are who have money or who make decisions and that kind of stuff. So I love the energy and the raw honesty of youth. That's fantastic. War Child works primarily with children children and youth throughout the world.
Right,
So
right.
we work with 500,000 children and their families every year. So I'm very familiar with working with young people. And we have a lot of high school students and university students, college students who volunteer through War Child clubs right across North America. Some of them actually become summer students in our office. They fundraise for us.
Right.
So we try to be the kind of forward-facing organization
Right.
that young people can get behind and really participate in.
Working with youth myself, for full time is all we do, is I'm constantly being challenged by older folk who seem like they never were young at any point in their lives, because they speak as if young people are some sort of thing they never were.
Yeah.
That we're all, these kids are so apathetic, they don't care. And then you run into something like the Parkland shooting, tragic, but oh my gosh.
They are confronting decision makers in ways that we have not seen, I don't think, frankly, in 40, 50 years.
Yeah.
And they're refusing to be silenced. And they're channeling that raw emotion and that energy. I mean, to listen to the Parkland survivors literally stand on a stage in front of the entire world and say, that it's bullshit.
Yeah.
That
No
anyone,
BS, that's what they were saying.
That's it. That anybody can walk into a store and get access to
Yeah.
a semi-automatic weapon like an AR-15. This is what it's going to take. It's going to take confronting that inaction and calling out those who are making excuses. And that's, I think, a unique thing about this particular generation is that they're, they don't have the same kind of guarantees that some of us had growing up. They're inheriting a world that is increasingly armed and, merciless. There is an increase in conflicts throughout the world, an increase in terrorism throughout the world, environmental changes, degradation. Most of them aren't even sure that they'll ever have a job.
Right.
And so for them, they're out there, they're putting themselves on the line because they have nothing to lose. And it's amazing. It's awe-inspiring.
It's their future.
It is.
Do the students today give you more hope for the future? Because I know, as a human being, I read the news and I deleted some apps from my phone because I found myself just reading too much of it and thinking and for me being someone who's deals in hope, I was starting to get myself a little bit down, and I was like, I can't swim in this because it's such ridiculousn's.
It's like swimming in tar, right?
It really is,
Yeah.
and you just can't move your feet anymore, and you get stuck. And so, does it give you hope for the future amongst all the garbage out there, all the crap you read about in the south of the border, and does it give you hope?
It does give me hope. I mean, I think the challenge, and I have a 12-year-old who's going to be, he's going to be 13 in a month.
Teenager.
I have it coming. But, I think the challenge is there are a lot of distractions, and a lot of what we're engaging with every day is extremely frivolous. And some of that's really necessary. We can't be really intense all the time. We do need some of those distractions. It's when the pendulum swings too much in that favor. And so, I try to encourage young people that I talk to, that I try to mentor, that make sure you find that right balance. It's not all about the selfie and the image and what you're putting out there and speaking to the choir, your network of friends and trying to look good and that kind of stuff. What feeds your soul is something that it has to be more substantive than that. It has to be something that you feel passionate about, that makes you get up out of bed in the morning and say, I'd like to change that. That's something that I think that I can have an impact on.
Yeah.
And that's the stuff when you look back over your life, that's the stuff you're going to be most proud of.
How do parents and how do teachers, how do adults foster those young people? What would you suggest that they do? Like, if you're listening to this and you're a teacher, you're a parent, and you're like listening to this podcast and you're just like, I have a young person. They weren't at the event. They how do you foster it? Like, I'm always interested in your people's perception of that.
Well, I think it's tricky, and having a boy myself, it's who's almost a teenager, it is hard. I mean, what we try to do is we try to infuse around the dinner table conversations on anything, whether it's a global issue, whether it's a local issue, whether it's injustice. We try to have those conversations even if he doesn't want to participate in front of him, so at least he's exposed to it. Reading is a huge part of what we try to encourage all the time, although, 13-year-old boys are not necessarily avid readers. Those that are amazing. And so that, I think, it's exposing them to the news. It's when March for Our Lives was on, we turned it on CNN and said, hey, look, I mean, these are young people the same age as you who are facing these dangers in their schools. and they're doing something about it. And we
Yeah.
don't have to be passive observers of our own destiny, right? And so that's the message that we try to send. And it's tough. It's tough. And if you can afford to travel to expose your children to different cultures, different people, different ways of life, these are all really great things.
I once heard someone say, if you want to get rid of racism and bigotry in the world, travel.
That's exactly right. And I also think that there are...
Get out of your own backyard.
Get out of your own backyard. And even for things like birthdays, we've, for the last few years, been really conscientious with our son about saying, okay, you can, there are different, like Echo Age, for example, where you can go on and people can donate, and then half the money will go to him for a birthday gift and half will go to the charity of his choice. And
He chooses.
He's chosen War Child, fortunately.
Well, good for him.
Exactly.
Good for him.
But it's I also try to check my own assumptions because I don't want to impose what I think and believe on my son. I would like him to come to his own conclusions.
Who inspires you?
I am, Stu, I am so lucky. I am surrounded by people who inspire me every single day. We have 250 national staff throughout the world. So these are people who come from war zones, who are giving back to their communities, who are doing it against extraordinary odds, local partners, local community groups, and they are phenomenal. And so whenever I find myself thinking, oh, it's too hard, or it's too much, or it's not enough, or, all those sort of self-doubt moments that we have, they're the ones that I think about, because the least they ask of me is that I get up out of bed every day and try.
Right. That's all you can ask.
Yeah.
Try. Now, you've received the Order of Canada, which is cool. I'd like to receive that myself one day. I don't know if you apply.
I'm sure you
for
will.
it.
Well, yeah, you do.
You
It's
just
right
apply.
here.
It's
Yes.
like an online application. Is there an app I can download?
Well, if you stand in the right location, someone will just come along and hand
Is that how it
one
works?
to you.
Yeah. Here's a free pin.
No, but the whole thing is to win any award, someone needs to apply for you.
Yes.
That's right.
Someone's
so
got yeah.
Duly, please pay attention, folks. Someone should nominate Stu for the Order of Canada. He deserves it.
Just something. I don't know. I got a Canada flag, a high five. I don't care what it is. So why I say that was not just to plug myself.
Although that was very effective.
Thank you. It was to ask you what you're most proud of.
Well, I mean, I'm a mom, and
Yes,
I
you
have
are.
and I have a wonderful husband, and so I'm most proud of our family, and the tightness and the closeness that we enjoy, which is really important. And that to me has always been my salvation, right? People ask me all the time, well, how do you do this work? How do you go into war zones? And it's because I've got great people in my life, and so that I'm very proud of. I'm really proud of the work that War Child does. It's not easy. We don't have deep pockets and huge budgets. We're not out there taking out massive ads or running big campaigns that cost millions and millions of dollars and making a lot of noise. We're just doing the work. We're there on the ground. We're doing it quietly, thoughtfully, purposefully with those local organizations, really meaningfully investing in them through education initiatives, access to justice, economic development. We're trying to disrupt the cycle of war, and we're one of the only agencies that exists that actually gets at these issues, not just at the grassroots level, but where they start, because of a lack of opportunity, because of a climate of impunity, because, young people are being recruited and abducted into militant groups, and we're trying to change war.
Yeah.
And that's, a really, really, really difficult thing. But in many environments around the world, we're seeing the impact of that effort. And that I'm really proud of. And I hope that, I really hope that outlasts me.
Do you still travel to the
I do. I'm heading to the Middle East next week, actually.
And so when you go to the Middle East, just you don't have to tell the whole story, but or get too deep into it. But when you go to the Middle East, you're going to the zones. You're going to see these things.
Yeah. Well, this particular trip, I've been to Iraq three times in the last year, but this particular trip, we're working with Syrian refugees in Jordan, and so I'm not going to be on the front lines of the action on this particular trip. But yeah, we are in areas. So our staff have come under attack. We've had to organize, mobilize evacuations. People have had to flee. But I'll give you an example of how amazing our staff are. Our staff in South Sudan, who are running youth development, doing youth development work. And when the violence hit, and we were one of the few agencies in Malakal that still remained, and we were right on the front lines, they hid all of our sort of resources, our computers and everything that they were using in the rafters of the building. They ended up hiding in all over the place, and then they ended up coming back, grabbing whatever they could, and they ended up becoming refugees in Uganda with hundreds of thousands of other Southern Sudanese. And we were trying to figure out where they were and whether they were safe. And they hadn't been there even 2 days, and they're calling us saying, okay, we have hundreds of thousands of refugees and kids here who need our help. Let's get started. We're ready to go. And we're on the receiving end here in Canada saying, but you've just been through hell and, with your families, and you've walked for days, and now you've arrived here, and you're calling us saying you're ready to go. Great, let's go. So it's the work itself is extraordinary, and I'm proud of that.
Where does that passion come from, do you think, to get up and go and do it, like for your team? And like, where does that, is it they're seeing the big picture and they want to help, or is it? It's
because it's what they live every day. That's their reality. They're confronting that violence every day, and they know that they are the alternative. They are a part of the solution. And they also know that if we do nothing, it just gets worse. And so I think, like all of us, any of us when we've experienced loss or trauma, we try to make sense of it, and we try to ensure that our own children won't experience the same, or that others won't experience the same. There is nothing that makes you more of an anti-war activist than having lived with war. And that's true whether you're talking about people who survived the Second World War, to others who are experiencing war every day. You can't confront that and not think that it is the worst we are capable of as human beings.
It's just, I can't even get my head around it. Like when you tell stories, I try and say, I think to myself, try and close your eyes, and can you relate? And I can't relate to the stories you tell. I want to, and I can't, because I'm very privileged. I live in Canada. I want for virtually nothing. I have a wonderful family, and I can't get my head around. I try, and part of the reason why I do this stuff is to try and get my head around these things. So,
but that's okay though too. I mean, I think we all can do. We all can contribute in our own ways, and we have lots of young people across Canada and the U.S. who've started War Child clubs, who are doing fundraisers, who are part of our advocacy campaigns. We have a great campaign out right now through War Child USA called 249, which is about the balance between, or the lack of balance between military and humanitarian spending. And so, it's we don't all have to be careening towards the front lines. In fact, that's something I don't recommend.
Right.
It's about doing things that are smart and thoughtful and exposing ourselves to some of these bigger issues. That's what counts.
How do you decompress? Like, how do you turn it off?
I do like a glass of wine.
Yes, as do I. As do I. But I mean, like, you must, like, we talked to Michel Chikwanine, and he's a child soldier, and I asked him, and he said it's really hard just to because it's always there. What you see, what you experience is always there. So how do you, and how kids just going through their own issues and challenges, like how do you decompress? How do you unplug from that?
It's, for me, it comes down to, sometimes,
Yeah.
I also knit, which is
Really?
a new thing in my life, but
Wow.
I know. That's also because I fly a lot, and so I just need to be able to check my brain. It's very mindful. But for me, it's about family, friends, meals. That's the best. I mean, if you're surrounded by people that you love and who love you, and you're enjoying great food and some wine and great conversation, that's the best for me. I love to go up north. We have a small family cottage near Haliburton, Ontario, which is on a no-motor lake, and the loons are calling, and it's a totally quintessential Canadian cliche.
Love it.
For me, it's heaven. It's heaven on earth. And
that's your unplug.
and that's why I unplug. And I've learned to straddle those divides. I think that's one of the benefits of aging. I used to come back from being in a war zone, and I'd be, frankly, a self-righteous pain in the ass. But
and what you'd want to, like, self-righteous?
You'd be standing in line at the bank, and people would be complaining because the
yeah.
teller was down, and I'd be like, "You don't know how lucky you are."
You have no idea. You have no idea.
And they would look behind, going, "What the hell is wrong with this lady?" Right?
Yeah.
But luckily, I have the kinds of friends who will tell me when I'm being a totally self-righteous
Take a
pain
deep
in the
breath.
ass. And so, but I having said that, I think we do need to be constantly checking our privilege and understanding that we are part of a global society, and that we can be effective agents of progress and change in protecting and upholding human rights, but only if we're giving to the right things.
Right. Where do you see War Child in 5 years? Where would you like to see it in 5 years?
Do
you have a bigger vision for what you want to do with it?
I do. We're relatively new to the United States. We're warchildusa.org, and I would really like to see us have a stronger footprint there, because so much of what we are seeing throughout the world in terms of the increase in militarization, military spending, the kind of confrontational nature of geopolitics right now in the world is being driven by the United States, by what I would call a very unstable human being who's sitting in the White House right now. And I think that we do need strong opposing voices right now, especially in the United States. So I'm hoping that War Child USA can help to harness that and to cultivate that, so that people are thinking in more constructive and inclusive ways and not buying into the propagandistic elements of his argument that are anti-refugee, anti-immigrant, anti-compassion, anti-empathy, anti-women, anti-everything, right? So that for me is a major priority. Stu, we're facing the worst refugee and famine crisis since World War II, and War Child Canada could double in size tomorrow, and still not be meeting all of the demands that are being placed on us right now. So I do hope that we will grow and continue to challenge the status quo, to move to encourage people to invest in smart, effective development instead of the bright, shiny objects.
Right.
But we'll see.
There's so many organizations out there that are wanting to help overseas and help in developing countries, and sometimes it's a big quotes around the word help. How does someone? I mean, obviously we'd love them to be involved in War Child because we love you. And we love what you're doing.
Thank you. The feeling is mutual.
Thank you. It's a love fest here. But how do people, how do parents know, or how do kids know? How do you pick? How do you choose? Because there's so many out there who are claiming to do all this amazing thing, these different things. How do you choose? I know what you're doing is legit because I know you, but I mean. It's the shiny object, right?
Well,
just pick the shiny object. Is that the one that has the biggest advertising budget?
No, in fact, if you're seeing organizations that are taking out huge ads all the time, then a good question to ask them is how much they're spending on advertising, because they might be spending $50 million a year on advertising.
Right.
Now that's partly why they're huge $300 million organizations, and those same agencies will tell you have to spend money in order to have the money to be able to invest in those programs. But I also think we need to go a bit further around asking ourselves, well, when I'm watching what this organization is putting out there, is it respectful?
Right.
Does it pander to some outdated stereotypes? Is it inclusive? Is it about sort of investing in local grassroots organizations, or is it about sending foreigners in to do the work? Because, when you're thinking about what's the better development model, there are trades and community workers and community organizations and local young people within those environments who are craving those kinds of opportunities. So is the better development model one in which we spend money to get on a plane and go overseas and maybe repaint a classroom or read to orphans, and especially not the reading to orphans, because there are volumes of child development studies that show that children who are exposed to a revolving door of foreigners become hyper affectionate, and so they become indiscriminate about their the kinds of relationships that they form, and then they're traumatized every time those people leave.
They're
right?
Coming and going.
And so you'll see blog sites where young people who they mean well, but they have pictures of the kids that they were with, and they're on their backs and they're on their shoulders, and they're saying how much they were loved and appreciated, and they don't realize that that's part of the trauma that kid is experiencing, because they've done that 10 times in the past year, and it's a problem. So I say, be smart, have a relationship with an organization, find out what they're about, do their values align with your values? Are they working at the grassroots level? If so, how? What are they employing national staff? How do they work? How do they choose their partners? And then ask some very fundamental questions around, do you spend money on advertising? Do you spend money on fundraising? What proportion of it is, part of your budget? Yeah. But recognizing that if somebody says, oh, well, we never spend money on those things, then they're also probably not doing a good job. Because if you want to be accountable for donors' money, you have to audit. Yeah. You have to keep track of it. You have to evaluate your programs. You have to improve when you make mistakes.
They have to evolve.
And that costs a certain amount of money. Yeah. So I always recommend about 25, less than 25% is a good number. But if someone tells you it's zero, then it's probably not doing not monitoring, or they're probably not monitoring, or they're relying a lot on hard goods, and hard goods are a problem because we get this a lot. People will say, well, I have books and I have shoes and I have this and that I want to send overseas. And the simple truth is that hundreds of thousands of textile jobs in Africa can be directly linked the loss of those jobs can be directly linked to the sale of used clothing from our side of the world. So, there are
So when you donate your clothes in that drop box.
yeah, it's not a good idea. I mean, if you're doing it locally to, say, a women's shelter or a youth hostel, fantastic. But when you're sending it overseas, it floods those markets with cheap surplus goods. And puts those local tailors out of work, reduces the overall price that a lot of those local women's cooperatives can charge for having seamed and made clothes.
Yeah.
And it rarely, especially things like books, I mean, they're not in the right language, they're not tied to their curriculum in the right way, they don't get there in time to be useful,
Right.
they're too expensive to ship and distribute. So ask those hard questions.
I would be convinced that most people wouldn't have ever. I would not have thought of that.
Yeah.
You don't think about it.
You don't think about it. You don't. It's not about you.
Right?
It's
It
not
shouldn't be
you.
about you. It shouldn't be about getting that picture or that certificate. Just look what I've done. It shouldn't be about you.
The whole point of development is that it is about someone else.
Yeah.
It's about making sure that they have the tools and the resources and the opportunities to rebuild their communities and to rebuild their lives in ways that they have identified as important to them. And even now in terms of development models, we know that and this is again well studied, that giving people cash vouchers that they can then use to buy the supplies they need instead of giving them, one bag of rice or 2 bags of barley that ends up being resold in local markets. People are grown-ups, and they should be allowed to make the decisions that they need for their families.
If you could send, I used to, Tim Ferriss always says, if you have a billboard anywhere in the world to tell people a message, they all had to see it. Billboards are old, so text message. You could send a text message to every person on the planet, one message, one thought, one idea or one suggestion, or what would it be? What would that one thing you send to everybody to just boom, you read it? Like, mine's always like, I always think like, just be kind. But like, what is that one? That's a hard question, I know, but it's hard to summarize.
No, it's not hard. It's just that there are so many. Well, I mean, for one thing, I run an international aid organization, so I guess it would be please give to War Child. But
yeah.
So,
okay. Yeah. That's it. So,
but if I'm trying to be more philosophical than that, then for me, it's always about promoting empathy and promoting understanding. So
Right.
be kind is a good one to use, but I would go a little bit further than that, and I would say try to understand. Try to put yourself in those shoes, walk that life, and then try to argue that those experiences don't matter, because they do matter.
right.
And for so many people throughout the world, war shapes their entire existence and takes everyone and everything they love from them. And if we can understand that it isn't a video game, it's not something that's happening remotely, it is something that we inadvertently, and I talked about this today, facilitate through the very things we do every single day, through the coltan in our cell phones, through the investments that we might have that are invested in arms manufacturers. If we want to have a safer, more stable, global society, it has to start with empathy
Right.
and with those expressions of concern.
Wow. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're awesome. We're done.
So are you. Oh, and can I just do a shameless?
Yeah.
I'm
Oh,
not.
yeah,
I am not.
actually, I
I'm
was
not
gonna-
paid to give a shameless plug to your organization in
okay,
any way.
gosh.
But I've done a few of your events now, and I speak at a lot of youth conferences right across Canada and including in the United States. You guys do a phenomenal job, and not only do you do it here, but it's programs. You offer programs all throughout the year for young people who are interested in developing their learning and their leadership. And that's the real deal. And I'm truly honored that you would ask me to speak here today. But I really do hope that for any young people and teachers who have come and have seen what it is that you guys do, that this will be the first step in a very long walk. Because we're often looking for quick things, right? You want to get on a plane, go overseas, do something, come back and talk about how you change the world. But you're investing in young people to make sure that they have the tools to really change the world. Not just this week, not just next month, but as they move on and become the next prime ministers and philanthropists and business leaders. And so I'm just it is awe-inspiring.
How do people get a hold of War Child? How do they donate? How do they connect with you?
So in Canada, it's warchild.ca, and in the US, it's warchildusa.org. And on there, we have info at accounts. You can just email us,
Right.
and you can put Dear Sam, and then they'll forward it to me, or you can just send a generic note, and we'll be happy to answer your questions.
Awesome. Thanks, Sam.
Great. Thank you.
You're awesome. Dr. Samantha Nutt, welcome to Studio 9, our incredibly creative podcast name.
Thank you. It's a beautiful spot.
It is, isn't it? It's kind of like, you can't see it if you're watching us, but it's like
right
being
up
in
there
a,
with the toilet next
yes,
door.
it's like being in an old bathroom. It really is. It's like a surgical unit almost
know.
too. It's like everything is very sterile. You have tile and you have stainless steel and a safe. I don't know what's in the safe.
Just in case we want to lock ourselves in
Yeah,
there and
exactly.
do a magic show.